is everybody's brother. He is the Father's Son, and Mary is his mother. He is human's language.
Good evening. Welcome back to Rectory Ramblings. I'm Father Scalia, and with me tonight is a very special guest for a very special episode. I did announce his name ahead of time. Well, I didn't want to spoil the surprise, but Christopher Scalia, who is, well, my younger brother. But for this episode, here to speak about the importance of reading fiction in the Catholic life, right? Or at least that it's not incompatible. So Chris is a parishioner at St. James, and he and his wife and now 4 children, the newly born Georgina Edith Scalia.
Named after Eddie Van Halen.
Named after Eddie Van Halen.
Who died days before. It's not actually true.
But it's a good story.
Yeah.
And good thing for her that she wasn't born after Billy Joe Shaver died.
That's correct.
That was Billy Joe Shaver bringing us into the show, who passed away today. Another great country artist.
Yeah.
And so Chris has a doctorate in English from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he taught English at the University of Virginia, Wise campus, for 8 years.
Yes. Yeah.
And now is at the American Enterprise Institute running their academic programs. So we want to talk about something you know a lot about, which is literature and
literature,
as you call it in academia.
PhD, that's how you're supposed to pronounce it.
You get a license to pronounce it.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Okay. So I always encourage people to have spiritual reading. Some book to help them to put in their minds thoughts that will be conducive to better prayer and reflection and contemplation. If nothing else, just to crowd out some of the bad thoughts that come in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about fiction, another kind of reading. And some of the greatest fiction authors are Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
Does that have any bearing on their works? And what how can this be helpful for Catholic life?
Yeah. Well, so first, when you talk about Catholic literature, it brings up all sorts of complicated questions of what makes literature Catholic. Is it Catholic just because it's written by a Catholic? Is it possible to have actually is there good literature for a Catholic to read that's written by somebody who isn't a Catholic? And I think there's overlap there. Like, just because it's written by a Catholic doesn't mean it's beneficial for you from a religious perspective.
It doesn't necessarily mean that it's good literature. Or Catholic.
Yeah, exactly. But then there is also, as you mentioned, especially in the 20th century, if we're talking about 20th century fiction, so much of the greatest fiction of that century was written by Catholics. British Catholics and American Catholics. Many of them converts, though not all of them. And what you get out from reading them is kind of a different way of engaging with the faith and seeing what it could look like in practice, either through negative examples or positive examples. So, all fiction. I know you like reading really old books. I'm going to go even before Christ and quote Horace here.
Wow.
He believed that the purpose of art is to instruct and delight.
Is Horace before Christ?
He's right around somewhere in there. Yeah. I think he's. I think.
Listen, you're in my territory. I'm a classics major, so this is one of the few things that a classics major can.
Well, he's whatever you say he is. That's what Horace is. And so I think all good art and all good literature does that. A lot of what I'm going to be saying.
Wait. What did Horace say?
Literature. The purpose of he's really talking specifically about poetry, but it applies to literature more generally. Is to instruct and delight. So. You should learn from literature, and you should have fun while you're learning from it. So, I mean,
I think that right there is, I think, kind of an important point because it, like growing up, there was beach reading, right?
Yeah.
Which was just like like Tom Clancy novels, which are fun.
You learn a lot about submarines.
You learn a lot about submarines. You learn a lot about what he thinks about submarines. Anyway. Right. So I mean, those are fun, but they're not. They're not great literature.
Right.
You're not really learning anything from them, but it's less. It's useful for sitting on the beach and reading.
Exactly. It's heavy on the delight and light on the instruction.
Right. There are no big existential sort of dilemmas in there.
But on the other hand, there is literature that goes heavy on the instruction and
short on the delight.
Short on the delight.
Put in that category.
I won't make any jokes about you. This is your show, so I won't. But I don't. Well, I guess a lot of it would a lot of the material I studied when I was a professor would fall under there.
Okay.
I read it because a lot of the the 18th and 19th century literature I studied, I really enjoyed. But then there's some of it you just have to know and read so you understand the context a little bit more. But I don't read much contemporary literature that falls under that category because I don't have to.
So this is great. Okay, so Horace is to learn and to delight, or to teach and to delight.
Yeah, and so and obviously the corollary of that is, as a reader, you hope to be instructed and to be entertained, to be educated and entertained. And so I think that those same kind of principles hold to what Catholics should read. And a lot of what we're saying about fiction, I think, applies to poetry too. But when you think of some of the great Catholic fiction we were referring to earlier, it is very engaging. It is very entertaining. It's often very funny. I'm thinking particularly of your audience probably has heard of Flannery O'Connor and Evelyn Waugh and people like that. They are very funny.
I think some members of the audience have named children after Flannery O'Connor.
That's very possible. But yeah, we learn about the faith. Even Flannery O'Connor was Catholic, but she wrote for many readers and wrote in a setting that was not really Catholic. So she doesn't always write specifically about the church, but often conveys church teaching.
Right, and so that's another thing. Is it how can there's sort of an oblique way of coming to of conveying a Catholic message. It shouldn't be ham-fisted and everything has to be explicitly about the Catholic Church.
Right.
And clouding your head, somebody over the head with
and she wrote a lot about that, and she was influenced by the Thomist Jacques Maritain. Am I pronouncing that correctly? And she was the original hillbilly Thomist before the bluegrass band,
right?
And so her ideas of what a Catholic art might be like were informed by Aquinas and by Thomists of the 20th century. And one of the things she said is that it does not have to be, you don't have to be writing about priests, you don't have to be writing about people at mass, but it just so happens that I have a quotation that might help elucidate my point. She wrote in one essay, "The Catholic writer, insofar as he is the mind of the Church, will feel life from the standpoint of the central Christian mystery, that it has, for all its horror, been found by God to be worth dying for." So that's kind of the perspective of the Catholic writer that will be conveyed in the story, even if the characters are not explicitly Catholic.
So it's taking sort of Catholic truths or even just a Catholic sense of things.
Yes.
And putting it in a situation. And I think this is what Tolkien hoped to do.
Mm-hmm.
Is like put it in a situation that people haven't encountered before, so that when they come upon that truth,
yes,
then they kind of see it anew, or they see it in a different way, so that they can appreciate it.
Yeah, and so Tolkien was doing that through fantasy,
mm-hmm.
and O'Connor did it through what became known as Southern Gothic, or something kind of this over-the-top grotesque elements of extreme, obviously much more realistic than what Tolkien was doing, but moments of extreme, shocking, sudden violence, and very bizarre, a little bit gross, slightly off-putting characters, to convey that same sense of
and all the odder, because because it comes from the pen or the typewriter of this, sort of,
Yes.
mousy,
Yes.
woman
Yeah,
in
exactly.
the rural South. Walker Percy, I think,
Yeah.
does the same thing. It's kind of these shocking, like weird,
Yeah. No,
scenes.
I think that's right. But then another person, I'm a very big fan of Muriel Spark. She's a Scottish convert to Catholicism that who was influenced by Graham Greene and Yves Lenoir. Doesn't get as much attention as her contemporaries as a convert, and I think in large part because as her career progressed, I think her novels did become less Catholic. But she's a lot like O'Connor in that she has these moments of very strange and off-putting novels with moments of sudden violence that can occasionally be the sources of grace, as they were for O'Connor. There's one of my favorite novels that I would recommend to anybody watching is called The Girls of Slender Means. And I don't want to spoil too much, but it's basically a long attempt by one character to find out what happened to somebody she knew and why he entered the priesthood. And we find out that something very shocking happened that kind of directed, pushed him in that direction.
It's like Graham Greene's short story, The Hint of an Explanation.
I knew you were going to bring that one up.
It's a great story.
Yeah, it is a great story, and you I think you're the one who introduced me to it. But yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. And I think that things are all the more powerful that way when it's not sort of head on, but coming at it from a different angle.
Yeah, but those are instances of The Hint of an Explanation and Girls of Slender Means, and then another great Spark novel, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, her most famous one. All of those are explicitly about Catholics, and in large part about why people became Catholic or entered the religious life.
Right, and at the time they were writing, England or Great Britain in the first half of the 20th century. First of all, it was kind of shocking to become Catholic, and then to enter religious life.
Yeah, no, that's true. But it is remarkable just how fertile that period was for Catholic conversion among artists.
Yeah.
Dana Gioia, the poet and essayist, has written a lot about that.
And what's the thought? Why did that happen? Why?
Well, it's not so much about why it happened, but I think you have to attribute some of it though to World War II and just kind of the state of things after World War I and after World War II. Kind of a search for meaning and greater significance.
I wonder if there's a corollary in on mainland Europe because I think there's in France especially there's a crisis of faith after World War II, World War I and World War II, was this great Catholic nation twice just had these terrible things happen.
And I wonder how many converts. I wonder how the Anglican Church fared after World War II. Right. We're talking about Catholic converts, but what was the help of the Anglican Church then?
Well, but I mean, if you're in Great Britain, you're probably sort of de facto Church.
Yeah, that's true.
But Francois Mauriac, I was going to throw him out as well. He's a French sort of counterpart to, I would say, Graham Greene. Yeah, kind of dark. But approaching things in a bleak manner. Yeah, the story of grace.
But it's what I was talking about Dana Gioia earlier, and what he points out is that there's just no that sort of Catholic presence in the arts doesn't exist anymore, and that's part of the state of Catholicism in America.
Does it not lend itself to art?
Do you want to talk about Vatican II for a little bit, or
just... Did Vatican II have a statement against art?
No, of course not. But I think
don't hang this on Vatican II.
Well, but the art of the church after Vatican II.
There was plenty.
And you can say that's not Vatican II's fault, as many people do.
It is not.
We weren't singing on the Angels before.
But the parish where you were baptized, received your first communion, were confirmed and wed, was built before Vatican II, and it is a spaceship.
An orange juice squeezer.
An orange juice squeezer. Okay, our neighboring parish. But
yes,
the chapel that North American College in Rome, which is, it's really it's a brutal chapel.
Mm-hmm.
That's before Vatican II, and I've always thought that the status of art is a good gauge of the health of theology.
Yeah.
And those two examples, to me, are like a sign. St. Michael's Annandale. I mean, there's another spaceship. That was built before the council.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that about my most favorite parish, my sacramental parish.
Yeah, sorry to do that.
Yeah. So, well, I happen to have another quotation pertaining to the arts. This one is from Pope John Paul II, letter to artists, and this is addressed to artists. It's from 1999. As you know, he now Saint John Paul II was a poet before he entered the priesthood, I think. So obviously, this is a subject near to his heart. He wrote a letter to artists, but I think if you understand what he thought artists could do and Catholic artists could do, it becomes clearer about why those artists should have audiences and how readers specifically could benefit from Catholic writers. So this is a little bit long, but it's by a saint, so listen up. With loving regard, the divine artist passes on to the human artist a spark of his own surpassing wisdom, calling him to share in his creative power. Dear artists, you well know that there are many impulses which, either from within or from without, can inspire your talent. Every genuine inspiration, however, contains some tremor of that breath with which the Creator Spirit suffused the work of creation from the very beginning. Overseeing the mysterious laws governing the universe, the divine breath of the Creator Spirit reaches out to human genius and stirs its creative power. And he goes on for a little bit longer, but I think that's inspiring, first of all, and great motivation for any artist to recognize the creative act as an echo, a very feeble echo, but an echo nonetheless of the original act of creation. And then,
which is an act of beauty, and I think that's something is that what God does is beautiful.
Yes, exactly, and it's also a creation of order,
right?
And that's what artists try to do. Generally speaking, they try to create order out of chaos or out of nothing. In my experience, when I try to write something, it's from the chaos of jumbled ideas and trying to create order on paper. Right. And so the reader, or the viewer or whatever, any artwork, is not participating in the creation, but kind of experiencing that creation.
It's a naturally contemplative act. It is a natural contemplative act. In other words, just listening to good poetry or just appreciating good prose. Mm-hmm. You're just appreciating it.
Yeah.
And you're not you're not necessarily like, okay, what's the point?
Yeah.
Like a lady said this to me. She her daughter was reading a great list of books for her high school English class, and the mom said to me, she said, I just don't get it. Like I'm reading these things that my daughter's reading. I'm like, well, what's the point? Get to the bottom line. I'm like, well, great books don't work that way. You're supposed to appreciate the prose.
Yeah.
Or going to a museum and standing in front of a great work of art. You just appreciate it. Why does it exist there? Well, it doesn't serve any end other than just to convey this beauty, and by way of that might be the truth as well.
But you are also at the same time invited to make order, to create as you view, and to kind of arrive at a meaning too, and make order of it to a degree. But it may not be it may not be an answer. There may not be a point. There may be a number of points, or a novel, for example, may just be trying to ask certain questions, and it's identifying the right questions that is what you're supposed to do.
I'm immediately thinking of how many people have tried to get to the point of The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton.
Yeah.
Which is just, it's a bizarre story.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a lark.
Yeah.
I think Chesterton's just like, hey, it's kind of fun.
As you know, I don't like that story. I've never liked it.
Well, I think one of the reasons it's just kind of hard to like, okay, what are you getting at? But we want to discern the order there. We don't want to impose it. We don't want to deconstruct it.
No, that's right.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's right. And you have to have kind of some respect for what the artist is trying to create.
So what's your beef with Vatican II?
Oh, I was just pushing buttons there. But I do think that I think post
doesn't sound like
uncharacteristic. Yeah. I think that musically speaking, at least,
you think?
That it's, yeah, it's
well,
not
okay,
the best.
but no, I think you have a point, and it's this: is that art really thrives in a theologically healthy atmosphere or climate. This is why some of the most beautiful art that the church has produced was in the High Middle Ages, where the church wasn't perfect, but there was a clarity of teaching. Dante could not have written the Divine Comedy without the clear teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas, which he, just kind of interiorized and then put in the poem. But and I think after the Second Vatican Council, there was a crisis of confidence. We weren't really sure that what we held was the truth, and we weren't really sure that order was a good thing. And so I think that's not a good atmosphere for artists, because the solidity of Catholic doctrine provides a space for freedom in the arts. Graham Greene, I think, Evil Noir is a great example of this, and especially the Sword of Honor trilogy, where the central point in that trilogy is the truth about marriage, right?
I'm so glad you brought this up.
Divorce and remarriage is wrong.
Yeah,
and that's central to the entire arc of this. It is the arc of the story.
But he never says that.
No,
he never said. I actually have that in my notes because I wanted to talk about how Catholic.
You had to put it in the notes, huh?
Yeah, it's right. It's a great example of how a Catholic novelist can teach us by making fools of his characters, basically. So Guy Crouchback, the main character of that trilogy, divorces his wife. He is Catholic, she is not, and I guess he's on leave at one point, and he tries to seduce her after their divorce.
Right.
And he basically wants to sleep with her, so he tries very hard to sleep with her.
Because that would be morally illicit, because she's his wife.
Exactly. Still. And she catches on, and she says, "You're only seducing me because I'm the only person you can sleep with." And it's hilarious. He's not, so he's wrong to do that in a way, but in another way, he's actually, right. She is the only person he could cheat.
Technically, right.
So it's an hilarious scene that actually has an important point. And I guess there's probably also a lesson about scrupulousness there too.
It not only has an important point, but is made possible by a clear teaching.
Yeah,
without that teaching, that funny scene isn't possible.
Yeah,
I think Love in the Ruins. Tom Moore is the character there, and Walker Percy's Love in the Ruins. I think that a similar thing is going on there. She's not Catholic, he is, and just kind of some of the interactions between him and his wife are because he's approaching things from a Catholic perspective, and she kind of thinks he's crazy. But and it's you have some funny scenes in there, and it's again based on the fact that there's this clear teaching that he is really feebly trying to adhere to.
So while we're talking about this, I want to talk about one good thing many people identify in reading fiction is that it develops your sympathetic capacities, your ability to understand and understand where other people are coming from, and have greater sympathy or empathy for them. And I think that's true for a lot of fiction, but it also overlooks the value of ridicule and satire. Those are good things. Again, I know that doesn't sound like one of your siblings saying that, but so Guy Crouchback was a subject of ridicule there.
Yeah.
We may feel some sympathy for him, but mostly he's the butt of a joke there. Flannery O'Connor has this great point about people. She writes in one of her essays that people overvalue compassion in fiction. There is a place for compassion, but it's compassion, suffering with a companion in suffering, and that's one way to have that's her preferred way of compassion. So
to kind of like bring the suffering to the reader.
Yes, yeah, exactly, and that's slightly different than what Wa's doing, but I think that there is a great tradition of important literature that instructs and delights while ridiculing and satirizing people and the stupid things they do. So I'm thinking of one of my favorite O'Connor stories is Good Country People, and there's a moment there where this very proud character gets her comeuppance, and by basically a snake oil salesman, well, a Bible salesman actually, and I won't go into too much detail, but he takes away her glasses, and as he's running away, she looks at him, and because she doesn't have her glasses, she sees things differently, and he's running across something that looks like he's running across a lake or a body of water. In other words, he's walking across water. So she's the butt of a joke. We're laughing at her, but even in that moment, as we're laughing at her, we feel sorry for her, but we also realize that this creepy guy was kind of the source of a miracle by getting her to see things anew. That's my reading of it.
Okay. Yeah. With Flannery O'Connor, I'm thinking I always forget the name of the short story, but it's semi-autobiographical. And it's a man and a woman, but who lived in New York for some years, and kind of a sophisticated crowd, and he loved sort of the socialite life in New York, and these cocktail parties where there'd be these erudite people, and there's but then he has to go home to this small southern town because of an illness, and he has to live with his mother, and he hates the town, he hates everything about it, and so he's trying to exact some revenge on his mom just to spite her, and so she's doting on him, and he asks to see a Catholic priest. Now they're not Catholic, right? He's not Catholic at all, but he just remembers this erudite Jesuit priest at some cocktail party in Manhattan. Yeah, and he's expecting that's what's going to happen. And his mother is loath to do this, but she does it because she loves her son. And she calls the local Catholic priest, who comes in like a dirty old cassock with a little bit of breakfast here, a little lunch there, and he's overweight, he's disheveled and everything like that. He pulls a stool up next to the bed, and he's just a meat and potatoes priest. And he says to him, "Okay, do you know your catechism?" it's just really skewering this main character. It's hilarious, and at the same time, it's sort of kind of laughing at the church that how is it that we continue to proceed through the centuries, and sort of the most fundamental workers we have are often the most unimpressive. Yeah, no, that's it's driving me crazy. I can't remember the name of that story either, but it's not Parker's Back. No. I think so. Yeah, that's different. So can I add to that about one of the things I love about O'Connor is so many of her stories are about very proud characters being cut down to size, and often characters who feel superior to annoying moms. And you get the sense that Flannery O'Connor was in a very similar position because she had to, as you said, come back from New York when she got lupus and spend the rest of her years with her mom, who seemed like she was difficult in some ways. But another great example of that is Everything That Rises Must Converge, where it's another young man really annoyed with his mom, and he sees to it that she gets her comeuppance, but then she suffers this very violent, tragic moment at the end, and it's very sudden, very powerful and moving, but you realize that you've been laughing at both of these characters the entire time. You realize that as the reader, you've been as prideful as these characters are, and then when they're cut down to size, you feel like a little bit of a schmuck, and you realize you've learned. I guess another way of putting it is that you've kind of participated in that creative act by being complicit. Well, that's a great way of putting it. Tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow's gospel. I know it's coming up shortly. Is the telling of the dinner party that our Lord goes to, and he's watching everybody jockey for a seat,
Mhm.
and then he goes on to tell a parable, and he says, well, when you go to a dinner party, don't take the highest seat, because then somebody more important will come and you could knock down. Like, no, take the lowest seat. That way, when you get promoted up, everybody will be impressed. Now, either he's giving really, really cynical social advice,
Mhm.
or he's skewering all of them. And I think it's the latter. I think that he is saying that entire parable with a smile and just saying, and he's kind of making fun of them.
Yeah.
And I think he's kind of letting them into it, trying to get them to laugh
Mhm.
at themselves. And so, in other words, there's
Yeah. So again, the virtue of ridicule. There's a lot to be said. And Muriel Sparks, somebody mentioned earlier, she was big on that too.
So
Love your enemies important, but ridicule them sometimes.
By the way, this is further proof that nepotism in our family is not actually a good thing. It's like
That's right.
you'll end up with somebody like just making fun of you, like a brother or nephew. So okay, but what about non-Catholic writers who can be helpful in this regard?
Well, it's possible. I mean, well, C.S. Lewis isn't Catholic,
right?
T.S. Eliot wasn't Catholic. Anglo-Catholic, is that close enough for you?
Can you become Catholic?
I think he stayed Anglo-Catholic.
Okay.
But F. Scott Fitzgerald is Catholic, but left the church.
It has to actually be
he's very Catholic.
I don't like his stuff. I don't know.
Well, I want to
reject that one.
I want to give you an example of one. My favorite writer, Walter Scott, who was the focus of my. I had to bring him in.
Yes, I should.
He was the focus of my literary scholarship, but he was a huge influence on John Henry Newman.
No, that's right.
And Scott was not Catholic, and in fact, in many novels, was very critical of Catholicism, for all the reasons that any British patriot in good standing in the early 19th century would have not liked the Catholic Church and been suspicious of it. He didn't like the idea of Catholics getting the vote and other rights later on in the 18th century, or sorry, 19th century. But he had an enormous influence on Newman, and Newman said that it was because I happen to have a quotation here. This is what Newman said about him: a great poet, and Scott started as a poet, but then your audience eventually wrote novels. Was raised up in the North, who, whatever his defects, has contributed by his works in prose and verse to prepare men for some closer and more practical approximation to Catholic truth. The general need of something deeper and more attractive than what had offered itself elsewhere may be considered to have led to his popularity. And by means of his popularity, he reenacted on his readers, stimulating their mental thirst, feeding their hopes, setting before them visions, which once seen are not easily forgotten, and silently indoctrinating them with nobler ideas, which might afterwards be appealed to as first principles. And those ideas were very, as Newman goes on to explain, were very often based on the ideals of the Middle Ages, because many of his novels were set in a Catholic past.
And can we also talk about how great literature just gives a view of the human experience?
Yeah.
And so I think Dickens I love in that regard. No, you don't.
No. I was going to make fun of it, but no, I like Dickens. But I taunt any 19th century author who's not Walter Scott, just out of habit.
Okay.
And sense of duty.
Really. And absurd principle.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Okay, good.
No, of course, Jane Austen.
Right, and I think these,
Dickens and
I think these are important just because and I think it's that sympathy that you, and not so much in terms of I guess in terms of seeing the human experience and realizing that you're a participant in that.
Yeah.
And there's in David Copperfield, which is magical, really.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I knew you'd like that. No, the turn in that novel, talking about the undisciplined heart, and it's such a great, like, boom. It's a great insight, and it's universally applicable.
Yeah.
It is one of those things, and I think in that sense, it as Newman was saying about Scott, it can lead to a desire for something more, which please God has realized is found fully in the Catholic Church. Dostoevsky, not only not Catholic, hated Catholics. Now, of course, there's the Russian Orthodox, strong influence there. So he is a Christian author. Leif Enger.
I know of him, but I have not read it. Was
Peace Like a River.
Yeah,
that is.
You and Mom tried to get me to read that.
That's an extraordinary book.
Yeah,
that's an extraordinary book. I'll never forget a young woman saying to me, "I don't like anybody who doesn't like that book." Oh boy!
Wow, I like that.
Okay.
It's good.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Certain principles,
Yeah.
strongly held.
Well, it's another great novelist said, "It's not what you're like, it's what you like." That's the.
Who was that?
Nick Hornby.
Okay.
High Fidelity. Anyway.
So
he loved Dickens too. Still does.
Okay. Now,
so can I say a word about the dangers of reading? It's possible to read to be deformed by what you read.
Yes, please.
Even if it's not necessarily bad in of itself, too much of that kind of literature, or maybe kind of reading only one type of book can deform you or malform you, and that's the lesson of a lot of 19th century fiction. You think about Jane Austen. We were talking about her novel Northanger Abbey is basically a spoof of Gothic literature, and somebody who reads only Gothic literature, and she's young, she's impressionable, and makes a fool of herself because she's expecting the
world to be like that.
Yeah, exactly. Walter Scott wrote about that in his first novel, Waverley. The main character has read nothing but romances, and so he expects certain things of life, and then as a result is easily manipulated and makes terrible decisions that almost lead to his execution. Even Frankenstein is in large part about reading bad books, not being educated correctly. That's less about fiction. But the monster is a great reader. He reads Paradise Lost and understands Paradise Lost. Victor,
he really is a monster.
Yeah. Victor, on the other hand, who is the real monster.
Ooh, didn't see that coming.
He does what he does. He creates the monster and has the pride he does, in part because he doesn't have teachers leading him he's reading outdated works that lead him down the wrong path, and there's nobody there to steer him in the right direction.
That is that is fascinating, because I think that cuts against a lot of the current wisdom, which is just reading.
Yeah. Oh, as long as at least he's reading.
Right. No. Some of the worst ideas in the world.
Yeah.
Are, of course, found in books. I mean, and this is Neil Postman talks about this, about why schools in large part developed after the printing press, because the printing press produced this enormous amount of literature suddenly.
Yeah.
And how do you know what's good?
Yeah.
And schools were in large part say, okay, we can't possibly read everything that's out there, and a lot of it is dangerous, and so we're going to teach you what is good. Yeah. And I think that's something that's been lost, is that not everything is equivalent. There's some stuff that is just bad literature, and or is harmful. I think a great example of this in recent years is the Da Vinci Code. Bad writing. I mean, just and bad ideas, and bad history. I mean, it's just bad. Yeah. But people ate it up
and believed it. Yeah, it's
not
only did it was bad. It's offensive on multiple levels. But the fact that people
the primary level was just bad literature.
Yeah. No, I remember I was in Europe when after Pope John Paul died, and and so they were having the conclave for the new pope. It was shortly after that, I guess, and I was with somebody who was saying she had read a Dan Brown novel, Angels and Demons, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's his first one.
Yeah, and she said, I feel like I know exactly what's going on in there because I read Angels and Demons. Oh.
Well, yeah, I was at a party and a guy got a conversation with a non-Catholic, and he said he asked about celibacy, and I said, well, ultimately the reason a priest is celibate is because Jesus Christ was celibate, and he goes, what about Mary Magdalene? Like, oh my gosh, you're using Dan Brown as a theological argument. So now I want to
wait, sorry. Before you go to that topic, Samuel Johnson warned that the main audience for novels are the ignorant and the idle, which I don't think is necessarily true anymore. I don't think young people are reading novels like they may have been back then, and there's less of a danger. But his big concern was that our concern now is I wish kids would read books. His concern then was kids are reading. We got to make sure these kids are not reading these novels. We got to be careful about it. So the status of the novel itself has changed to a large degree, but there's that danger in any reading. I mean, it's like I mean, to put it in a more religious perspective, you have to form your conscience correctly, and there's something similar with reading habits.
Well, and the sense of beauty, and there's a lot of talk about Dostoevsky's famous line that beauty will save the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's an element of truth to that insofar as beauty should communicate the truth, as we mentioned earlier. But I always have in mind another line from another great author, Walker Percy. One of his characters, a moviegoer, says, "Beauty is a whore," which is, and his point there is that it's not enough to think something is beautiful. Your sense of beauty needs to be trained, and if it's not, then you won't know the difference from McDonald's and a fine steakhouse
and Wendy's.
You'll think any fast food chain is the same.
Well, I know, and that's such an old idea. I mean, nothing against Walker Percy, but that goes back so far. I mean, like Edmund Burke's first book was a treatise on art and what constitutes beauty, and it was understood that if you didn't think certain things were beautiful, that means that you weren't educated correctly.
Right. The defect is not in if you stand in front of the Pietà and say, hey, okay, that's your problem, not Michelangelo's.
Well, that's Dad liked to quote that teacher of his, the Shakespeare principle, that if it was some student in class that Dad was in, I guess, was complaining about a Shakespeare play, and the teacher said, basically, if you don't like this play, the fault is not in Shakespeare, the fault is in you, and that's something similar.
St. Augustine talks about and the classical world in general had it was presumed that there were certain principles that of beauty. It wasn't just whatever you happen to think is pretty. There were certain things that must be present in order for it to characterize beauty. C.S. Lewis talks about this in The Abolition of Man. Still one of the most important books, and in the first section of it is all about that. Is it the objective truth of beauty? It's not just an opinion.
Not a well-known or not a prominent Christian, Steven Pinker, writes about something similar in The Blank Slate. He has a chapter about kind of universal features of aesthetic beauty, elements of beauty that are kind of embraced across cultures.
And we've talked about this before, and we've kind of touched on it already, but how order, which is one of the principles of beauty, enables a certain expertise, if you will, or and I just heard this today, a great description of freedom, which is
just another word for nothing left to lose.
Not where I was going.
Okay.
But somebody said that to me after Mass years ago. I gave a homily on freedom, and somebody said, it's just another, and said it in all seriousness. I went, okay. But that freedom is so the person like in jazz who can improvise. Being able to improvise, that's not just for anybody. You need to be deeply rooted in the tradition. and you need to know the music backwards and forwards in order to really improvise well.
Yeah.
And that's freedom. And I saw an artist like writing a sonnet.
Yeah.
You know, which has got certain rules, and if you don't obey the rules, you're not writing a sonnet anymore. You're writing something else. But the one who's really free can work within that and accomplish something beautiful.
Yeah, Scorn Not the Sonnet, a Wordsworth poem is in large part about that, and he has another poem comparing the beauty of a sonnet to the joy that nuns feel in the convent. There's structure, there's order there that leads to expression and strength. You know what? Many poets who complain about modern poetry and specifically the move away from formal poetry and poetry in regular meter. Poets who were first trained in regular meter and in formal poetry,
right.
And so knew those fundamentals before they went on to kind of break away from them. Few poets master that.
Right, and then the upstarts
don't have that in their toolbox.
Right, and all the upstarts want to go immediately to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And there's a similar thing goes on in theology.
I doubt it.
Yeah. So, you know, I think a useful distinction is between fact and truth. That facts are, you know, data, right?
Mm-hmm.
But truth can be expressed in something that is fantasy. So in that sense, of course, Lord of the Rings is fantasy, but there are truths expressed in there. And all fiction it's fiction. It's not factual.
Yeah.
But there are truths contained there. And so I bring this up because I heard this the other day, and so I went and found it. Heard it referred to the other day. So Vaclav and Kamila Benda, who were in dissidents in Czechoslovakia under in the old Soviet bloc, and Kamila was asked, "How did you prepare your family, to resist the socialist and the Soviet pressure?" And she said she read to them 2 or 3 hours every day. This is in addition to her full-time job. She read them fairy tales, myths, adventure stories, and even some horror classics. More than any other novel, though, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings was a cornerstone of her family's collective imagination. This is coming from Rod Dreher's new book. And he asked, why Tolkien? And she says, because we knew Mordor was real. We felt their story, that of the hobbits and others resisting the evil Sauron, was our story too. Tolkien's dragons are more realistic than a lot of things we have in this world.
Yeah. Not to get too political, but you look at the novels everybody points to now, The Handmaid's Tale, for example. There is, people perceive real truth in that novel. 1984, I think. Handmaid's belongs to one side of the aisle right now. 1984, people across the political spectrum see truth in that.
Brave New World. Yeah, Brave New World. Yeah. And it's funny, Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, he begins with the question, which of those two futuristic novels has come true? Yeah. 1984, Brave New World. And he says Brave New World. And then, of course, he's writing back, I think, in the 80s. But I think at this point we could say both of them.
Yeah. So the combination of the surveillance state and
the surveillance state,
pleasuring yourselves.
The surveillance state that also wants to entertain you into submission. Right. Yeah. So should we end on that happy note?
Yeah, we could do that. Well, how about you ask me what? Yeah, what I'd recommend.
Yes,
for Catholics looking
for good literature. Do you want to recommend authors or books?
I don't really feel like I should answer.
Oh, please.
Okay.
Please.
I would. Okay, we've talked about Flannery O'Connor and Yves Lenoir. For those of you watching who have not read anything by either of them, Yves Lenoir, my favorite is A Handful of Dust. Everybody else's favorite is Brideshead Revisited. Scoop is great, but it's not Catholic. I'm identifying the more Catholic ones. Right. The Loved One is another great one. We were talking about the Sword of Honor trilogy earlier. That's a trilogy. Go to that if you like what you get with the other ones I've mentioned. Any Flannery O'Connor's short story is wonderful. I think most people prefer her short stories to her novels. But I mentioned Everything That Rises Must Converge, Good Country People. Temple of the Holy Spirit is maybe her most Catholic short story. The Eucharist itself features prominently in that one. Graham Greene, The End of the Affair, maybe.
Yeah,
His
little racy.
A little racy. The movie is much racier, and
The
this
movie-
is the point in time.
The movie's not the end of the affair.
Yeah, that's right. Spoiler. What's the other one? Heart of the Matter is fantastic too.
Well, and the priest, the whiskey priest, Mexico.
Oh gosh.
It's-
Yeah,
I love that novel. Good old what's its name?
Power and the Glory.
Power and the Glory.
Yeah, I like it, but I don't like it as much as the other ones I mentioned.
Yeah, that one's more explicitly Catholic, and I think that one probably feels more to priests because we like whiskey. No,
that's right. His first one, Brighton Rock, has Catholic elements, but I think it's weaker than the others. I mentioned Muriel Spark, The Girls of Slender Means, The Crime of Miss Jean Brodie. Those are my two favorite, but any of her really first five are very Catholic. You mentioned Walker Percy. I think you like him more than I do, but I would obviously recommend him. The Moviegoer.
The Moviegoer is great, and Love in the Ruins. I think those are his two best. And actually, well, it's not fiction, but his nonfiction writings and Flannery O'Connor's nonfiction writings are awfully good.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I brought a collection of O'Connor's essays. Her letters and essays are wonderful. I would recommend J.F. Powers. I think
I love J.F. Powers.
You like him very much too. He's another mid-20th century Catholic. All of his best stories are about priests. It definitely does not glorify the priesthood.
He has the jeweler's eye for the parish priest.
Yeah.
And so much so that the priests in, I think, the Twin Cities,
everything is set in the Midwest.
Yeah, well, in Minnesota mainly, and the priests in the Twin Cities thought that it was just a pen name, that it was actually a priest who wrote it.
I didn't know that.
It was so good.
Yeah. So those I think those are my favorite, and I haven't mentioned a lot of other very, very great.
What about Willa Cather?
I have her written down. So Death Comes to the Archbishop. Would you go to that? Or
absolutely, or Shadows on the Rock.
Okay,
which is about colonial Quebec.
Yeah.
But
My Antonia,
that to my mind is one of the most beautiful novels.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's not Catholic, but it's one of these that just it introduces you so profoundly into the human experience that you just it broadens your way of thinking.
Yeah. And there are a couple of other good collections of Catholic short stories. You gave me one recently, The Substance of Things Hoped For.
Yeah.
Which is a nice collection. And then there's another one called, I think, just the best Catholic short stories. You can get both pretty easily in paperback on a certain large site. And then we've been talking about older writers, but there are some people still writing who are pretty Catholic. T.C. Boyle has a number of pretty Catholic short stories. Tim Devereaux, I think I'm getting. I thought I had him written down here. I can't find his name right now. Is an American still writing whose stories are very Catholic, and Ron Hansen is another one.
I like Ron Hansen stuff.
Yeah,
it's good stuff.
So those are just some ideas. Again, I'm leaving plenty of people out, and we haven't even touched poetry because you didn't want to go into.
Well, no, we're not getting into poetry. Yeah. Okay, but Ballad of the White Horse by Chesterton is one of my favorites. Now, you've written poetry as well.
Mm-hmm.
Peter's Fish, is that going to be published?
Well, that was published a long time ago.
Was it?
It was 5 years ago.
Okay.
And
the CV you sent me, it said.
Oh yeah, that was an old CV. It was published in the Anglican Theological Review.
Right, that's great. I love that poem.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with
My
us
pleasure.
this evening.
That was fun.
So I didn't announce the name. I mean, in part because I didn't want to spoil the surprise. But also, I was kind of worried that if people knew that it was going to be two Scalias.
That's a lot.
Like one, bad enough.
Yeah.
Two of us. Yeah. But I have to say, I'm grateful you're here rather than Father Agent because I can interrupt you, and you just understand that that's
It annoys me, but I wait till I get home and I complain to my wife about it.
And Father, I mean, but you understand that that's just kind of what we do.
Yeah, it means you're enthusiastic about the topic, and I hit on a point you really like.
Right,
I take
right.
it as a compliment.
Right. So, well, listen, thank you so much for being with us this evening, or whenever you're viewing this. Unfortunately, we'll have to take a break on Monday. We have our annual Mass of Remembrance Monday evening, 7:30 p.m. That is All Souls Day. And so we'll have our annual Mass praying especially for all the parishioners who've died in the past year, but in general for all the faithful departed. So hope to see you next Friday. Until then, God bless you.